I'm sorry for the delay. Once again, I am Tim Newdecker from Kyo Logic. Glad we got our kink for the presentation out in the first slide. It means the rest of our presentation will be smooth and wonderful. Okay, John, next slide, please. So, FileMaker Academy is a consortium of FileMaker Platinum FBA members who are striving to help educate the general public in the power of FileMaker Pro and the proper use and deployment of FileMaker Pro. So if you have any questions or need any help with your FileMaker Pro work, do not hesitate to contact any of the companies you see listed here. Kyo Logic was founded in 2002. We're a FileMaker Platinum company. We'll be doing our presentation today. And our large area of focus is in excellence. We work with small solutions up to very large corporate enterprise IT solutions. And we're very proud of the work we do. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please do not hesitate to use the question box to ask us those questions. I see many of you have already given us comments. I thank you. I will be answering those questions throughout the presentation as we go. And any actual technical questions for John during the presentation, we will ask him at the end. So do not hesitate to send your questions in. Our presenter today is John Mathewson from Kyo Logic. Welcome, John. Thank you so much for your time in putting this presentation together.
Great. Thank you, Tim. I just wanted to say that this presentation I'm giving today came out of the work we do with the Connecticut FileMaker Developer Group because a lot of people had interest in themes and styles and really didn't know that much about it. And I have to confess that when I started the process, I was learning from the beginning as well. My interests in doing this type of work are that I really believe FileMaker is an awesome tool for allowing us to build lightweight database tools that are very, very powerful and can be developed in a short amount of time. The nice thing about FileMaker is that it also scales up to very large applications. So we really have the ability to service from relatively small startups kinds of situations right up to fairly large situations in larger firms. As a personal note, I'm a hobbyist in audio electronics and do a lot of designing of electronic pieces. And I also enjoy writing code for microcontrollers, which is mostly written in C. And some of the stuff I'll be showing you a little bit later taps into some of that hobby. So the agenda for today is we're going to talk first about layout objects because that's really what are affected by themes and styles, and understanding some of the under the hood kinds of components that go into the layout objects will be helpful in understanding how themes and styles can benefit you. The second, we're going to talk about what themes and styles actually are and some of their properties. We're going to talk about customizing them and some of the behaviors there. Throughout, I hope to sprinkle in comments about performance and ways we can improve performance. And then I'll finish off with talking about how we might be able to get started with styles if it sounds like an approach that you'd like to embark on. So let's talk first about what the goals of themes and styles are. I think the biggest one is to talk about improving consistency. From the beginning, in the last several years, from the beginning of FileMaker 12, we've really seen the introduction of a real push by FileMaker to make our applications look more consistent. Usability studies show continually that applications that are designed consistently, have nice layouts and clean layout object design, are far better for people to use than ones that are scattered and hard to look at. The second thing about themes and styles, which I think is really interesting, is that it supports customization, which has always been one of the strong points of FileMaker, the ability to make things look just the way you want them. And styles and themes support that to a very large degree. I think a big part of the performance is it allows for lighter weight layouts, and we'll get a little bit into that later as to why that's so. And I think the real goal here in terms of these lighter weight layouts is to improve overall performance, especially in WAN environments such as cloud computing, use of WebDirect. Think of mobile devices. As these devices get smaller and more nimble, we want to have processes that are not putting too much tax on their central, not only their processors, but also on the web traffic. So we did some speed tests, and this was using WebDirect. And what we did is we took three different types of layouts actually, And what we did is we made some very complex layouts. We used some ones that were kind of poorly designed from a theme and style standpoint, and then we cleaned them up, and then we ran successive tests on loading layouts. And we found the performance in the WebDirect situation was improved by roughly 30%. And in some cases a little bit more, sometimes a little bit less. We also found not quite as high, but similar kinds of improvements also in just on a regular LAN FileMaker Pro environment. So we're pretty confident that where FileMaker is going with the themes and styles is very directed towards improving the performance of devices as we continue to become more and more mobile in our work. So let's talk about layout objects, because this is at the heart really of the whole story. So something I learned largely from materials that were shared from the developer conference, and the engineers at FileMaker presented this. So I will readily acknowledge that I borrowed heavily from their work, because it's quite interesting to hear how this stuff actually fits together. One of the things that's on every layout are called views, and views are from the object, the layout object up. In other words, if you have a field on a layout, that field has to render all of the complex and visuals and event handling that are affecting that particular object. And a cool thing about views is that they're only rendered when they're visible. When we load information in on a layout, essentially we grab all the information, the fields, etc., but we only render the views when they're actually become visible. So you'll see that some of the new tools that have been offered in FileMaker 13, like pop-ups and off-screen and panels and some of the hide object, these are all things that help us manage the visibility of layout objects. And we have the benefit that we're not trying to process all those views when those items are actually not visible. Layout objects kind of come in two styles. One are standalone objects, such as a field, and they have components, and there's some complexity there. But then we also have container objects, and these are different than container fields. But these are things like tab controls and portals, and these now contain the items that are placed within them. And for example, a tab control can have up to 100 different components that fit in to make it all up. And so what we start to see is that if we can do things like style or tab controls, we start to control the proliferation of all of these various components that need to be rendered in that view model that we talked about just a few minutes ago. There's lots of different properties that are affected, and you'll see that as we get into this, there are so many different choices that can be made in terms of styles and properties for different objects that we should be aware that having a strategy to handle this is part of the challenge that we face. Something to know about, which is a new command, which is called refresh object, and it appears in the script commands in the miscellaneous section. And in the past, we only had refresh window, and that was used at various points in our scripts, typically to make sure that the user could view changes made to the data. Now what is being recommended is that we refresh only the objects that are affected by those changes. And the reason for that is that the refresh window is a much more thorough rebuild of the layout than it used to be. It essentially tears down all those views we talked about a while ago and forces them to have a complete rebuild. The one big advantage of refresh window, if used sparingly, is that it does allow us to flush cache data and also flush related data, and that is a power that the refresh object does not have. But as long as it's used judiciously, it will not affect your performance adversely. The thing you would not want to do, for example, is have a refresh window in a loop, which would be repeatedly tearing down and rebuilding a layout, which would be very costly in terms of cycles. So let's talk about themes and styles a little bit. FileMaker 13 has 51 themes. Themes operate at the file level. So themes are, once they're fully saved, affect all elements within a given file. And therefore, if you have a multi-file solution that have multiple places where you have interface, you can import a theme from one file to another and thus end up with a consistent look across multiple files. Themes can be customized, and we'll show that in a few minutes. Themes have basic properties, so you should know that there are certain behaviors of themes that cannot be modified through customization. For example, drop-down menu button icons are not something that can be modified. So the different themes may have slightly different shapes and views for those icons, and those essentially come with the theme. Another thing to be aware of is that the classic theme is unique, and it's primarily there for the purposes of importing and bringing in FileMaker 11 earlier kinds of materials. And it has a lot of additional baggage, and is highly recommended that you not use the classic theme as a starting point when designing work in FileMaker 12 and 13. The next thing, of course, about themes is they have styles, and styles are the tools that fall within themes. And if you're wondering where styles actually show up, if you look at the inspector and you have 4 panels on the inspector, it is the styles and appearance tabs that are affected by styles. So that means that the data and position tabs, the 2 outside tabs, are not affected. So changes made there are not captured in a style. Everything else on the 2 inner tabs, however, can be captured in a style. And as you can see from the appearance tab that I'm showing on screen, there's a tremendous amount of detail, and we talked about those properties earlier, and those can be customized within this scope. One thing to know about styles is that they really do apply to one object type. In other words, if you have a field, which is a normal edit text box, and you have another field, which is a pull-down or drop-down list, the styles from the edit field do not apply to the drop-down list, and vice versa. So there may be times when you're working with styles that you will want to reapply the look of one type of field to another type, and that cannot be done through copying files. But there are some tricks to get around that, and I'll show that to you in just a while. In FileMaker 13, there are 3 new types of style controls which are worth noting. One is shadows. Shadows have been entered. If you see on the right there, you can do both outer and inner shadows. But they're not recommended to be overly used, not because they're not attractive, but because they have a very high cost in terms of processing. They're so high, in fact, that they're not even available in FileMaker Go. So it's recommended that if you do use them judiciously. You don't want to use them all over your application. The second area is padding, which is a wonderful addition, also visible on the right there, where you can set the number of points that will be padded top, bottom, left, and right in your various objects. And that becomes really valuable, and there's some quite interesting text techniques that you can use using this powerful padding capability. Another new thing are image backgrounds. We can now put image backgrounds on most of the objects on our layouts. These are editable and can be changed. You can use them to do all sorts of very interesting graphic designs, including even putting images on the background of a given layout. One trick, though, is to know that they do have to be brought in by the processor and through across the network, and so try to keep those small because having a large, heavy, dense photograph, for example, it needs to be loaded every time it's brought into the layout, and that can have a high cost on performance. All themes and styles can be renamed, modified, and deleted. This means there's actually one exception that I found to that, but in general, you can count on the fact that you can copy stuff, you can modify it quite extensively, and you can remove elements that are not required in your file. So it's a very versatile setup once you get used to it. Another thing to know about customization is that if you change a style, which might affect, say, for example, how a layout looks. How a field looks on the layout, that will only affect the local layout until you save the theme. In other words, it's local to the layout that you're working on until the theme itself is saved, and I'll show you that in a minute. Something to be aware of is that custom themes and styles improve performance. In the old days, what we used to do was to take a standard layout and customize the heck out of every object that was on there. And now what we want to do is rather customize a theme and apply it to the objects on the layout. That's a very important change, because what that will do is make many objects on a layout look at a single style, and that will improve performance tremendously. And finally, themes can be imported from other files, and therefore a really good idea is to do your customization in a secondary file and then import it into your live work. So let's take a look and see how this all kind of looks in real life. So this is a simple database that I created. And to put in perspective, I'm going to guess I have about 20 hours total time on this database. I use it, I build a lot of electronic stuff. It seems to take me way too long to do. But one of the big challenges when you're building electronic equipment is that there are so many parts available, and you find a significant amount of your time just literally trying to manage the parts list for building these various components. So what I did is I put together, using some of the reusable code that I've talked about in the past, I put in a simple menuing system and started to build the ability for me to manage my work and, most importantly, my parts lists. So we're going to look at the LSA-1 Mark III, which is the current preamp I've just designed. In here we have 5 different components that are various elements that fall within it. And today we're going to look at the microcontroller board, which is where the actual brains of the preamp reside. So this simple layout here is just a layout that I have that allows me to see the various parts that I have in my microcontroller board. And I have various navigation tools, and again, I'm not putting this forward as being the most beautiful thing that has ever been designed, but I think it's nice and clean, and it most importantly allows me to organize my work in a tremendous way. I also have some nice little tools. We talked about hiding stuff, but you see I can also, for example, click on this button and see my board layout. I can click on this button and see my schematics. Sorry, that's running off screen for you a little bit. Sorry about that. And I can also use my tab panel to hide, for example, stuff that I don't need to see all the time. Eagle is the tool I use to write these various schematics, and this allows me to import and export information to the Eagle program so that I know that I've got consistency between my board design and the parts that I'm ordering. So here are my various parts, and so what we're going to do is we're going to go into the parts library and we're going to make some changes. So I'm going to go in and let's take a look maybe at the Arduino microcontroller, and I can come in here and I can take a look at the controller, and I have a whole bunch of layout objects that are rendered here, and we're going to start modifying them and looking at them in terms of themes and styles. So first of all, how can we get themes into our application, or excuse me, into our file? The first one and most commonly done is the change theme. And this one here allows us to see themes that have been supplied by FileMaker and also that you have customized. And I have one called JFM Parts that I customized based on the work I've done within this file. This theme that I've got is based on the Enlightened theme, which is one of the most powerful themes that FileMaker offers. As a general rule of thumb, I recommend looking at themes that have more elements to them. Enlightened being a good example. You've got an Enlightened one for the Mac and PC. We've got Enlightened for print, and we also have a touch layout, which, if you notice, has larger elements for it for use on the iPad and iPhone. Any FileMaker Go applications. Now down here we have many different ones. Many of these were introduced with FileMaker 12. Some of them I find more useful than others. But they all have different looks and feels to them that you can kind of look through and see what appeals to you. But today I'm essentially started with the Enlightened theme, and I converted that into one called JFM Parts, and that's what I'm going to use today. You'll also notice down here we have the ability to import themes, and that's how we bring in themes from other files that we have. And this is a technique you could use, for example, to customize your theme and then bring it in from a different file. So one of the things that that I wanted to show you was moving from the theme into talking about some of the styles. And obviously at this point we're very interested in the inspector. As I mentioned before, this the two central tabs of the inspector that allow us to manage our styles. Now, what a style does is it determines how a particular field is formatted. And you'll notice that this field, for example, here, has got a larger, if I look over my appearance, if I look over my text, you'll see I've got an 18-point text. And I have the ability then to modify this further should I want to. So say, for example, I decide that I'd really like that to have bold. What happens is that I'm able to change that there, and then you'll immediately see that the style, which is one that I created, ends up by having an asterisk next to it and a red down arrow, meaning that I'm no longer consistent with the original style that I had, the original text field header LT style. Now I can do various things here. I can save changes to that style and move it somewhere else. I can save it as a new style, which is a very valuable thing to do if you're creating new styles. I can rename it. I can also revert it, which will essentially take it back to the way it was, and I can also delete it, which I wouldn't recommend because I got a lot of things attached to it. So, but you'll notice if I revert the file, the red arrow goes away, as does the star. If I come back in here again and mark it back to bold, and if I want to now save the changes to that, once again this will go away, and I now have this defined as bold. Now, you'll notice as soon as I did that, the JFM parts went red, and until I save the changes to the theme, I will not have other layouts affected by this change. So it's kind of a cascading set of tools that you have to modify and replicate throughout your application. When you're working with themes and styles, one of the things that I found very useful is in the manage command there is an overview tool which allows you to look at the themes within your application. And it's a little bit of, this is an eye-opener. If you haven't done this on any of your files, I highly recommend it, because you'll find things in there that you may not have been aware of. For example, in this one here, I have 7 classic layouts, which if you asked me what they were, I'm not even sure. I have one that's stayed over from the Enlightened theme. I have the 29 that are the ones that I've sort of paid attention to, and I actually even have one from Enlightened Touch, which was probably when I was doing some experimenting. So if you'll notice something interesting, the classic theme cannot be deleted. This is the exception to being able to delete a theme. I don't know why that is, but I did notice that in any files where I've brought it in, it sort of seems like it's there to stay. And again, I'm not sure of the underpinning reason, but I did notice that. If I try to delete something, let's just say, for example, the Enlightened theme, if I try and delete it, I'm going to get an error telling me that I cannot delete it because it's in use. And this is the only mechanism I found for finding which ones were in use. And so this actually could be somewhat clumsy, but it is a tool. If you're trying to find out where something was in use, you can go through and somewhat sequentially go in, and then find this layout, change its theme, fix it, and then return and check it, and then sort of consolidate. The goal here should be to try and get rid of any of the unnecessary changes and other themes that I have in my file. So coming back to the whole behavior of themes again, you'll see that my JFM parts now is recognizing that there's a change to it, but I have not replicated it to other layouts. So if I go into browse mode and I come over here to projects, you'll see I have another layout up here, another field up here, which is based upon the same style name, but it has not yet been saved. And so if I want to make this replicated across my application, I have to come in here and save the changes. And it'll warn me, do I want to do this? Because it's going to affect everything in my application. And if I say save, it goes ahead and saves the changes. And then that becomes consolidated across my application, across my file. So that is the way in which things that have been made in one area can be replicated across an entire file. That tool, by the way, can be used in various very beneficial ways as you're developing various techniques and graphic objects in your files. If we look at some of these, you'll see, for example, that I have the default theme. This is essentially the default. I have not modified it in any way that I'm aware of, although I must have done something. And this is now showing that it has not been saved to the theme. And if I go to this, I can save the changes to the current style, which will then go and update everything on this layout. And if I go and I save that then to the theme itself, it's going to warn me and it's going to update my entire file. And so that's the way in which changes to our themes can be replicated. Another thing I wanted to show you was something that confused me at first, is that the more complex objects, such as tab panels, actually have components in them. And some of the theming that goes on takes place at the actual component level. So when we want to affect the look of a tab panel, we actually drill into the tab panel and we start to make changes to the component itself. So in this case here, if we look over here on the inspector, we see that we are in a tab control and we are currently looking at the active state of that control, which is the normal interactive state that we are dealing with. We also have a tab that is not in focus, and that is the inactive state. And if I select that, it starts to let me see what the inactive state is for the tab control. Now, one of the things I've never liked about when I've worked with this is I find that the black and with the white text actually draws my eye more than the white does. So I'd like to try and fix that, to try and tone it down a little bit. Whoops, I just did a major slide there. And so what I'm going to do, it's a little confusing because actually what you have to do is select the active, but then I'm going to go ahead and select the inactive view, and I want to make just a simple change, which is I want to gray down the text a little bit. And then I also want to do the same thing for the active, which I want to come out here. I'd like to bold it up maybe a little bit, maybe make it 13 points, bold it, and maybe make it a nice blue color so it stands out a little. Ooh, that's a little punchy. We'll try something like that. Okay, so now if I go and I save it, I now have a new behavior where my look has changed, and this is now the look that I have for this particular tab. Now, if I look at my styles, if I want to save this, a good strategy for doing this would be to save this as a new style. So I'm going to do that, and I'm just going to call it tab modified. I'm just going to use a simple language for now, and I now can have that as part of my my overall theming for this particular JFM parts theme. If I want to use this on other layouts, I need to save it. So what I can do here is just come in here and save it to the theme. I'll save it. Now I can go into other parts. I have this particular one here, and I want to do this. Now, because I've saved this, I can actually come in here in my styles, and I can select TB modified, and the behavior just picks up directly. So you can see where you can start to use this for tremendous power in terms of being able to make changes in your application and either do them on a layout by layout basis, or more advantageously do them on a application or file wide basis, which would allow us to have a very consistent look but also save you a lot of time in development. One thing I want to point out here is if you have a particular item like this, let's just see, I've already saved it, sorry. But if you have an item like this that is the default, and you see that the default is showing that it is actually got a red color to it, and you save it, you'll notice that when you go to another one which is also default, it will also be showing red, even though you just finished saving the change to the style. And one of the tricks that FileMaker has built in is that when you actually save the layout, it will reconcile that. When I first started working with themes, I found myself having to change every default in the entire layout manually, only to find that that actually is not necessary. When you save the changes to a style and then save the layout, it automatically will update other objects on the layout that have the same style. One of the things that's useful to know also is that when I try and apply, I'm going to just copy this. Whoa, sorry. Just put that right down there. And what I wanted to do is to show you that sometimes we might want to have, I don't know why we might want in this particular case to do it, but we might have a situation where we're trying to show a particular style across two different types of objects. So in this case here, I have an object, if we look at it, which is a drop-down list, and here I have another object, which is a field. And I cannot select, so if for instance, say, oh boy, I like that one a lot, that purple, and I want to save it, so I'm going to do a save as, a new style, and I'll just call it purple. It's actually a drop down. So that's kind of cool. So now I say, well, I want to apply this. You'll notice I can't because it's a different type of object. So there is a tool for doing that, however, and that is over here. And if you notice these two small arrows, and these are very similar to the arrows we had in FileMaker 12, the top one copies the style of the entire object, and the bottom one copies the style of the individual part. So if we have a component and we want to just copy that component, or we just want to copy the one state, that's how we take care of that. We do this using this tool here. But in my case, I want to copy the entire style, so I go up, and I now have it available to me. I can then come over here to a different type of object, and I can apply that style. And now I can, for instance, come in here and save that as a new type of style, and I now have my ability to replicate my purple field. And so that's a good technique to be aware of if you're trying to copy a specific component or behavior of a component to another type of component. That can be very beneficial. One of the things to be aware of when you're working with themes is that there are several things that are kind of not good practices, and one of them, which is very easy to fall into, is where you find something. For example, I create something here, and I'm in my one theme that I'm on, and then I go and I create a layout. So let's say I copy this, okay, and now I'm going to make a new layout. I'm going to select a form type. Oh, it's playing tricks with me. Oh, come on. I'll just do that. And I want to, now this one here is on JFM parts, but I'm going to change the theme of this, and I'm going to use Enlightened. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to paste that piece that comes from JFM. Now what I've done here, which is really not a good idea, is I've copied an item that's from the JFM theme to a layout which is based upon the Enlightened theme. The effect of doing that is that when that view that we talked about earlier is created, the entire view has to be created right up through all the theme behavior, and it is extremely undesirable. I know for a fact that when we were first working with themes, this mistake could be made very easily from time to time. So it's really important that within any given file, all of the components or objects within a layout are consistent with the theme of the layout. You never want to cross-pollinate. And one of the things that has happened, I believe, because I know from talking to user groups, is that people will start out with what they think is a clean slate, which is the classic theme, and then they'll start bringing in cool objects from the different themes that have a little bit more behavior that they like, thinking that they've now sort of customized the classic theme. That, in fact, the FileMaker engineers couldn't be more emphatic that that is a very undesirable thing to do. So when you're working on your materials, please make sure that your styles on the or any of the objects on the theme are excuse me, any of the objects on your layout are in the correct theme. So I wanted to show you a couple of more things that are useful in terms of ways you can use styles to some benefit. One of them, which I thought was just, I saw this in a demo, which is just a really interesting approach, which is using themes and styles as a means to reproduce graphics in your application. So what I did here is I came in and I imported, we'll look at the appearance here. This is the advanced graphic and graphic area. So I can come in and I can make a new item, which in this case is just a plain rectangle. And then using the new ability to fill that with an image, I can come in and say, boy, I'd like to bring that in. And so I'm going to go and grab our logo, and I'm going to insert that. Now at first it wants to do this as a tile, but I'm going to change the tile to scale to fit. So there it fills it up nicely. And I'm going to also make it so it doesn't have any line associated with it. And so now I've got the Kyo Logic logo loaded into what is essentially just nothing more than a rectangle. I'm then going to come into my style, and I'm going to save the new style as, I've already done this before, so I'm going to do it again. And I'm going to save that. All right, so I've got that. Now what I can do is I can come in, I can grab remember the same type of object, come in here, label it, and all of a sudden I have my logo available to me. So this becomes an awesome way that you can replicate stuff across your application, because you now can put if I save this now to my JFM parts, if I save this to my theme, I now have this as a behavior that's available to me anywhere in my application. Really very, very useful. I'm actually going to go back into browse. Whoops. I'm going to go back into browse mode. Go back here. So if I wanted to, for example, put our logo on my parts database, then I can do that by just coming in here, filling that in, selecting that, and going into browse mode. So should I want to change that, that becomes pretty easy to do. I'll show you a second example, just as another way in which that could be done, is I have this button here, which is essentially, it's actually not the prettiest thing in the world, but it's actually a very powerful tool, because what it allows me to do is to go to the part suppliers for any one of these items that I'm looking at. So this took me to a place where I can actually go and find and purchase this microcontroller from the Adafruit site. But I have this basically linked up for pretty well all the key part suppliers, and it saves a tremendous amount of time should I be needing to find out specifics about things. So this is a very powerful, if not the most attractive, item that I have within the application. It's something I use a lot. So if I come back in here and I go and I look at it and I say, I kind of like it, but it's kind of not in the color scheme of everything else I'm doing, I can come in and I can modify its appearance. So the way I can do that is I can go and choose, I can go and find another button that I prefer, and I'm going to go with this one, which is all blue, which is closer to my color scheme, and I can then come in and save the changes to the style, and then save the changes to the theme. And when I go to my parts form, it's automatically changed. So there's two techniques which are really good examples of ways in which you can really fairly quickly modify the look. There's a third one which I'll show you quickly. Actually, I'll touch on it very quickly. I'm not going to actually demo it just because I'm looking at the time. And that is, you can take a text object and you can draw it and theme it accordingly. So I'll just do it quickly. I can come in here, I can write some text, and then again I can select the style that I have pre-made, which is a label example, and I can come in here, select my label example, and it automatically formats it. And if you want to look at some cool things, you can also do stuff that's a little more dramatic. You can use it in various ways, and as long as you save your changes, it'll automatically be replicated throughout your file. So you can start to see where I think FileMaker is heading with this type of approach, where you're starting to see styles not just as like little nice tweaks, but rather fundamental design elements that can be used in your application. The last thing I'd like to show you is just importing themes, just so you can get a sense of how to do this. I can come in here now. I have a second file that I took, and I just for the fun of it made the menu green instead of blue. And if I go into layout mode and I come into my change theme and I say I'm going to import a theme, I then can come in and I'll copy it in from my modified version, which I've called parts copy. And it'll say, do you want to bring in the JFM theme, the JFM parts theme? I'll go, okay. It's going to warn me that it already exists. Do I want to replace it? And if I say yes, you'll see it came in with a different color theme. If I click OK, I'm just going to go yes. And you'll see now, if I now have that, and I now have got a green. So you can imagine doing that. Now, what made that work was the fact that between the two sets of styles, the styles on this matched, and if they don't match, then they're not going to copy in, but if they do match, then they'll automatically update. And so I think that's a very good strategy for replicating. Obviously, it has to be done carefully so that the items within your file and your application match your main master theme. So I'd like to go back and do a couple of conclusions from what we saw here. So here's just a quick summary of some performance tips. One, use the new tools to simplify the layouts. Hide things in using the pop-ups and using panels and some of the other new techniques. If you're going to use images, keep them small. And although I didn't show slicing, slicing is a technique for replicating a small image across a larger space. Avoid shadows because they essentially have high cost for processing. Don't paste objects across themes. Remember that invisible items use much less processing, so it also leads to a cleaner design. So the more that you can make hard choices about what people see at any given time, the better. When you're using custom themes, when you develop your own themes or use the ones FileMaker supplies, feel free to remove unused styles because that will continue to make your application lighter weight. And most importantly, try to keep local modifications to a theme to a minimum. There's a real issue if you have a lot of changes that you've made locally, it makes those rebuilding the views much more difficult. And so the more you can find ways to consolidate and use styles to replace those modifications, you'll find much better performance. So if you're interested in moving forward, here's a couple of tips that I picked up from some of the research that I was working on. The first thing is select a base theme that you think you can live with. I generally like the ones like Enlightened that already come out of the box with a lot of different behaviors, and they're also very attractive. Second, create a naming style. I didn't get into this too far, but there are some people who've done some work. Bob Shockey is one who've really gone into this whole idea of naming your styles so that they can be easily copied from one file to another. Typically, the process I've used here is the first underscore TX there underscore is saying that this is a text style. The second one is telling where the function of it is, and I like to also say whether it's center aligned, right aligned, left aligned, etc. So I use CT for center in this particular example. You'll find your own methods, but the core idea here is to name it around function, not around something like color. Don't say blue. It's much better to say what the function that it performs and name around that, and try and identify the object type. And I'll mention it in the next slide, but Bob Shockey has a tool that he has made available to the community that is very helpful for kind of visualizing what all these different choices might be. As a general rule of thumb, we could probably anticipate having 4 types of themes in your files, depending on what they are being used for. You could picture having one for lists, one for forms, one for touch for Go, and the Enlightened has a print style, which is very useful to have. And it's perfectly fine to, for example, have the Enlightened print in the same file as, say, another one of the themes that are being used for your other types of list and form, etc. Another recommendation is to set up a sandbox, which is a sort of a master file where you develop all this work, where you evolve a master theme and end up by adopting a kind of a look and feel color palette that you really like, and then bringing that into your applications and files rather than trying to customize, because you can end up with things that don't play too well together, and so it's going to require a little bit of planning. And as I say, always copy your themes from your sandbox. If you're looking for additional information, much of what I talked about today came from the 2014 Developers Convention. I highly recommend that you attend if you haven't. It's always a wealth of knowledge, and FileMaker, the FileMaker platform is going through a very big change right now, incorporating some of this new cascading styles, sheets, etc. And it's a really great opportunity to pick up on what the thought leaders and engineers are doing to move this forward. You're attending FileMaker Academy. Obviously, we have the FileMaker Academy site. We are producing videos and presentations on a monthly basis, so there's lots of updated information there. There's also a YouTube channel for FileMaker Academy that you can go to, and every one of the presentations we've ever done gets posted there, and our goal is that over time people can use those videos to learn various attributes about the FileMaker platform. I mentioned Bob Shockey. His company is the Alchemy Group. He has produced this tool called Stylo, and it's available at his site, which is shown on the slide there. And that is it. Tim, back to you.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, John. That was very enlightening, though it did raise some questions that I would like to ask. So while I'm asking this first round of questions, if you have any other questions for John, something that may not have been covered, please find the question area of the webinar meeting and type your question to me, and we will do our best to get it answered here. Okay, for our first question, I'm going to roll 2 questions into one for you, John. You mentioned that the Enlightened theme was a very powerful theme, and you also mentioned that Classic was not, and to avoid it. What makes a theme powerful, and why is Enlightened considered that, and why should we avoid Classic?
Well, that's a great question. Okay, so the power of Enlightened, I think, really comes from the fact that it's available in the touch mode, the regular PC Mac mode, and also the print mode. You'll also notice that if you look at the styles that come in with it, they're very rich. We have choices of different color buttons. There's a bunch of different behaviors that are associated with that. If you look at the top 4 or 5 themes that come in from FileMaker, those are the ones that have the most versatility, and they're also the ones that were introduced in FileMaker 13. By contrast, the classic theme is a theme that is entirely special purpose, and its goal was to provide FileMaker a way to bring in the older style of layouts from FileMaker 11 and before into the new FileMaker 12 and 13 environment. So it's sort of a necessary tool to allow that transition to take place. It is not a proper tool to be used as a starting point, for example, for building your own themes and styles.
Great, thank you. Okay, I have another classic related question for you. This attendee asks, and I quote, I have a new file started out in classic theme, but I found another theme that I like much better. Is there a way to apply this new theme to all the layouts in one shot rather than apply the new theme to each layout one at a time?
I am not aware of a way to do that. I believe you will have to change the themes on a one-by-one basis. What you do is you change the theme. What I would do is change the first theme, customize it the way I want it, replicate that theme, and then apply that to your other layouts. But there is no automatic search and replace kind of tool. There may be in future releases, but there is not one yet.
Thank you. So we have two questions now related to images. The first one is, what does it mean to use slicing on images?
Slicing is where you take a part of an image and you replicate it. So, for instance, you might have a very small, like little, like a small pattern or a color, and you want to replicate it across a larger space. FileMaker gives us the tools to do that replication using the slicing tool, and it gives us controls over how it replicates and what areas of the original artwork it replicates. And it's a very lightweight way of filling a particular object with an interesting pattern without having to have the full cost of the entire pattern being loaded by the application.
Do you know where these slices or images are stored? Are they actually binary data in the themes?
I do not know that. I would assume that it falls under the broad strategy that the FileMaker has for managing and caching images. I think it falls into that broad file management. That would be a great question to bring up at a DevCon with one of the FileMaker engineers.
Okay, and I think this next question may fall into that same category. And that is, when you use the logo in the theme, how does the performance of that differ versus creating a global field and loading that logo its boot up time?
I haven't tested that. To me, it's lighter weight. It's not part of the schema. It's very easy to replicate, and I think that the performance is more geared to how large the specific graphic you used. Like that Kyo Logic logo that I used there was actually huge, which is not a best practice. But to me, it's more of an element of convenience. But performance-wise, I do not know the difference. The other thing, of course, is that it makes it easy to import from other. So, for example, if you had something that you needed to change the logo in, you could do that quite readily using the style approach. And I think it would take somewhat more time to use the global field approach.
Okay. So here's another question. A user would like to export a custom theme they've created to import later into other files. How can this be accomplished?
Well, there is no export process. It's all an import process. So what you would want to do is to have that file act as the source. So, for example, you could do a save as of the file and use that as your sandbox, and then the replication part of it would always be importing from that file. To do that successfully, you have to have matching names for your styles, and that way when you import that theme, the matching names will pick up, and then the local file will essentially absorb the behavior from your master theme.
Great, thank you. And that takes us out of time, and we have a few questions left, but we'll try to get those up on the blog for FileMaker Academy. Again, thank you for attending our class. Our next class will be January 20th, the what, how, and why of barcode integration, presented by Ryan from Anvil Data Works. That will be a great one. If you've never worked with barcodes, or you have and you want to learn the best practices, this is the class to see. Again, this session will be posted on YouTube. Please join us. If you have any pressing questions before our blog post is made, feel free to contact John or any of the other FM Academy members that you see listed here. Thank you very much for your time today.